All right, so today we're going to continue talking about psychoanalytic theory of personality, but we're not going to spend as much time as we did on Freud's theory. In fact, you're still working on that probably with the defense mechanisms, but we do want to meet two other psychoanalytic theorists and just get a few more vocabulary terms that sum up their take on personality theory. A lot of what Carl Jung and Alfred Adler theorized about personality development is rooted in very similar ideas that we learned about with Freud's theory. Both Carl Jung and Alfred Adler were psychoanalytic theorists. They both Carl Jung was almost like a protege of Freud. And so they still both believe that a lot of what, develops into our personality and what drives it and helps us understand it is based on these subconscious ideas, thoughts, feelings, desires, much like what Freud proposed in his theory. However, both Carl Jung and Alfred Adler, we will see, have their own little spin on it and their own little take on understanding personality. So let's talk about Carl Jung first. There are ultimately two vocabulary terms that we're going to put in our notes that sum up the bulk of Carl Jung's theory. And those two vocabulary terms are collective unconscious and archetypes. I'm going to explain them. I want you to write them down. Eventually you're going to do an assignment that's going to hopefully expand on this concept and this idea more in a way that you'll fully understand it, even if you're a little bit confused after this brief explanation. So Carl Jung, again, like Freud, like the psychoanalytic theorists in general, believe that a lot of our personality is derived from these deep subconscious urges and thoughts and feelings that we have. And so, in that sense, it's very similar to Freud's theory. However, Carl Jung believed that the way our personality develops and how we can understand that revolves around a little bit less the way that those things that we hold inside continue to affect us throughout our life, and more about just this universal human experience that we all share. So that's what the collective unconscious and archetypes are all about. He believed that all humans share what he called a collective unconscious. Well, what is that? It is this collection of urges, thoughts, desires, instincts, memories, etc., etc., etc. All of these things that make us who we are as human beings are really shared between all of us. And in that way, there's something that's very similar about all of us in terms of the human experience. And so, these urges, these thoughts, these desires, these things that are collected in our subconscious and our collective unconscious are what he called archetypes. These are those universal ideas that are shared by all humans across time and across space and across generation and across culture. These archetypes sort of define being human, not being an American in 2020 versus being Chinese in 1500 versus being from somewhere in Africa in the 1800s. He believed that these archetypes are universal across all of that. So what would be an example? Again, you're going to do an assignment that's going to dive deeper into some of these examples of these archetypes that we hold in our collective unconscious. But let me give you one example. We have archetypes. If I say to you, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to think about what love means to you, what that idea is and what it means. Just close your eyes, and in your mind, just imagine how would you explain and describe and understand what it means to love somebody. Well, if I asked you and all of your classmates to do that right now, do you think that a lot of you would be thinking about very similar things? And the answer to that is yes. Now, would you have your own little unique spins on it and maybe some differences about what, the things that you value or whatever like that? But generally speaking, if we looked into all of your minds, or if we just had you all kind of explain what you were thinking, I'll bet you there'd be a lot of similarities. And the same would be true if I went to a Chinese cyber classroom right now, somewhere in China, and I asked 17-year-old Chinese students right now to close their eyes and imagine and think about what love means to them. Do you think that a lot of what those teenagers in China would think of in terms of love would be similar to what you guys are thinking of? And the answer is yes. So it's kind of fascinating in that sense, but it gets even more fascinating. Think about this. What if we went to an African classroom 100 years ago, somewhere in Africa, and we asked African teenagers in 1920 to close their eyes and think about what love means? Do you think, again, that a lot of the ideas would be similar? And the answer is yes. Obviously, there would be slight variations from culture to culture and from time period to time period, but ultimately, Carl Jung believed that there are certain human experiences that we all share in common with one another. And these archetypes end up kind of defining how our personality develops and grows. Again, when we get into the assignment you're going to be doing on the collective unconscious, well, specifically more on archetypes, hopefully this will make even more sense. So there's a little bit about Carl Jung and his collective unconscious. The third and final psychoanalytic theorist that we want to talk about after Freud and Jung is Alfred Adler. And much like I just did with Jung, it's really just about a few vocabulary terms that I want you to get down. And so I'm going to just put those up here. Most of Alfred Adler's theory about how our, oh geez, I knew that was going to happen. Let me give it another shot. Most of what Alfred Adler's theory is based on revolves around what he referred to as inferiority complexes. So, Alfred Adler, again, still believed that a lot of how our personality develops comes from childhood experiences, things that happen to us that maybe we don't understand at different times in our young life, but then those things become a part of who we are in our subconscious, and they're always there sort of driving us and affecting how we grow and develop into adulthood. So a lot of that, again, is very similar. He's a psychoanalytic theorist, but his idea was based on this one basic concept, and that is that personality is based on the desire to overcome inferiority complexes. He believed that humans naturally from day one have this drive or this desire to overcome obstacles and overcome our inferiority complexes. This begins in infancy with the things that infants have to overcome. Ultimately, when we are first born, we have a lot of inferiority complexes. Every single thing that we have to accomplish is like getting over some inferiority complex. What ends up happening is that parents have to, adults in particular, parents have to help us overcome those obstacles early on. And the way that occurs, how parents navigate through, a child trying to first roll over, and then crawl, and then walk up or down stairs, and so on and so forth. The way parents tackle those obstacles with their kids is what ends up creating what Alfred Adler called lifestyles. These are the experiences that are in this early stage of development really setting us up for how our personality is going to develop. So the simplest way to look at that and make sense of it is to say this. Parents can do one of two things on the two ends of a spectrum in terms of helping their children overcome inferiority complexes. You can over-pamper children, and you can always take care of the obstacles for them or move those obstacles or help them overcome things, or that's one end of the spectrum. Or on the other end of the spectrum, a parent can neglect an infant and a toddler and a young child and never help them to overcome any kind of obstacles and inferiority complexes. So whatever experience we have as young children on that spectrum, either being over-pampered by adults versus being neglected by adults, is how we learn to overcome obstacles, how we learn to overcome our inferiority complexes, and then how our personality develops. So it really comes down to just these two vocabulary terms: inferiority complexes and lifestyles. But again, back to the psychoanalytic theory, which is what we're still, talking about. A lot of that is based on these early childhood experiences, how they affect us, what we get out of those, and a lot of that is probably still subconscious stuff as we're growing and developing our own lifestyles and our own personality. We may not even understand some of those experiences we had as a young child because we were an infant or a toddler and we don't have any memory of them, but they are still inside of us and they are affecting how our personality develops. All right, so there we have two more psychoanalytic theorists, Carl Jung and Alfred Adler. Loosely, the root of their theories of personality are still based in the same kinds of things that we learned about with Freud, but then they kind of have their own little take on it. You are going to spend a little bit more time learning about and exploring Carl Jung's theory of the collective unconscious and these archetypes that he recognized.